I'll now call this meeting to order. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the final agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the final agenda that's submitted.
Thank you. Is there a second?
The motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion does carry. Our next order of business is to adopt the minutes from the June 7th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. Is
welcome.
there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. The motion does carry also. We have two discussion items this evening. Item 3.1 is public hearing for a variance for the principal uses front yard setback requirement in the R-1 district for the property located at 2400 Heron Lane. Our first discussion item on this agenda tonight is 3.1, and it's a request for the variance for a front yard setback requirement for 2400 Heron Lane. This item does include a public hearing. Before opening the public hearing, I will now turn it over to Planning Technician Keith Demarest for a staff presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So a couple months ago, we were approached by a homeowner from 2400 Heron Lane regarding a third garage stall attachment on their house. There's a request for a variance from the principal uses front yard setback requirement in the zoned R1 district for the property located at 2400 Heron Lane. The overhead picture does do some justice to the house with the pie shape of the plot here. Oh boy, there we go. Applicant, Mr. Beal, is with us this evening. This house is zoned in the R1 low density residential district. It is proposed construction of a third garage stall within the 30-foot front yard setback. It would intrude approximately 4 feet into the front yard encroachment. I'm sorry, it would intrude about 4 feet into the front yard setback. This is in the R1 district. The setback limit for this district is 30 feet for the front yard. Property owner requests a variance based on the following proposed rationale. Given the unique pie-shaped and corner lot, the topography and the location of the current garage, it is not possible to adhere to the current 30-foot front yard setback established by the city without altering the essential character of the Lake Bridge neighborhood. The placement of the house by the original builder did not accommodate for a reasonable future expansion of the garage meeting city code. What's meant by that is the house was centered on the plot versus there's room to the left of the house. If the house had been moved over to the left and taken advantage of the side yard setback, there would have physically been room to fulfill this at the time if it was planned ahead for. This is a survey showing the proposed third stall here on the northeast side of the structure. So this far corner here, this corner of the garage would be the intrusion distance here on the front yard setback. So you're seeing in real small print the 26 here. That's where the challenge came into place with the garage placement versus the 30-foot setback. The variance will be granted if it does meet the following. The property owner proposes to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the code. The plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by the landowner or previous landowners. The variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the locality. and economic considerations alone do not constitute practical difficulties. The board may impose conditions in the granting of the variance. A condition must be directly related to and must bear a rough proportionality to the impact created by the variance. The Board of Adjustments and Appeals will not recommend, and council will not grant a variance unless they find the following facts. Strict enforcement or interpretation would result in a practical difficulty or undue hardship inconsistent with the intent of this code. There are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applicable to the property, use of facilities that do not apply generally to other properties in the same district. Granting a variance will not adversely affect the public health, welfare, and safety, and will not be detrimental or injurious to property or improvements in the neighborhood. Granting of the variance will not allow a use which is otherwise not permitted in the zoning district in question. And the planning commission must find that the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, and no variance should be granted unless there are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applicable to the property, use or facilities that do not apply generally to other properties in the same district. Unique lot shape may be used as a rationale to demonstrate circumstances unique to the property that may result in the hardship to build in a manner which conforms to the zoning code regulations. And the commission should consider whether the subject property's unique lot shape resulted in a practical difficulty to construct a third garage stall. Can I go off script? Yeah. I've been working with the homeowner on this for the last couple months. They've been very receptive to changes, and we've gone back and forth. They would really like to stick with this 30-foot garage stall, which would match up with the front of their house. It would be a clean face all across the front. And we found that, this is probably going to be the, right here, this corner here is just going to intrude in the front yard setback by 4 foot, based on, again, which we're seeing with a lot of our variances and challenges that we've had here is these corner lots, these pie-shaped corner lots. So what I explained earlier was, with the side yard setback being what it is, the house physically could have been placed over almost another 10 feet to the left, which would have, in essence, put the third garage stall right here where the garage currently sits. But they centered the house as is on the plot, which basically stole room from the northeast side here.
Why do you think they did that?
They didn't plan ahead for that. I think they wanted a minimal footprint on this corner lot without adding that third stall, and they, using the house footprint, they centered it as was.
Are most other homes in the neighborhood 2-car garages or 3-car garages?
3.
It actually is a mixture. It's heavily on the 3-car stall. You'll see a majority of them will be the three stall fronts.
It looked like the neighbor was certainly 3.
Yep. But there are some sporadic 2 stalls throughout the neighborhood as well.
Okay.
With that, did I just jump out of the whole thing?
Maybe to add, staff is generally
Got it.
supportive of the variance request, and we have our applicant here who would be more than willing to answer any questions that you have. It does require a public hearing.
Very good, very good. Well, I will now open it up to the public hearing, and Tony, if you would like to speak on your behalf.
Yeah, is it okay if I sit here, or would you like me to?
Yeah, come up to the podium, and then your name and address. Not that we don't already have it,
Understandable.
but it's on tape, that's the reason.
Okay. Gotcha. My name is Tony. I live at 2400 Heron Lane with my wife, Emily, and our two children, Aiden and Olivia. We've been there since 2014, and we were the second homeowners for that residence. And I'm here for the garage addition. When we first moved in, we didn't have any children, and then in the last 3 years, we've had two. Aiden's soon to be 4, and Olivia's soon to be 2. And with that growing family and the opportunity that we want to grow the family more, the garage we currently have just doesn't have enough space for us to have yard equipment, toys, of course, with the 2 young children that we have, and 2 vehicles. And to continue to grow our family, we would actually need to get another bigger vehicle. Right now, we have a Jeep Grand Cherokee and a Chevy Silverado, and when those 2 vehicles go into the garage, it's very tight, especially trying to get out of it. And we've learned through the winter months and the summer months when it can be very hot, when we have to put our kids in the car or take them out to go inside, it's usually in our driveway. So when I'm not home or if I'm at work, Emily's doing a lot of that from the driveway herself, where she has to leave one kid in the car to get the other one out, and she has to do that all outside majority of the time. So we saw the opportunity to maybe add a 3rd stall garage, and we've been looking at it for the past 3 years, and our contractor came to us and informed us of the variance, and I've learned a lot the last 2 months with the help of Isaac and Keith in regards to the variance, the setbacks, and the encroachments.
Do you have any artist or architectural view of roof lines and such in front?
Yeah, we
front
do.
elevation?
We did have a contract. We had 2 contractors. The second one noticed the setback, and we do have a look of the overall part of the house.
But I mean, with the addition, with the 3rd stall, do you have a roof line drawing?
Where the 3rd stall roof would be, yes, I
Yep.
do have it here. May I approach?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'll actually pull it up on the screen here.
Oh,
but
good.
Maybe just as a point of housekeeping order, if there's no one else wishing to speak, you could close the public hearing.
Do we make a motion to open the public
Yeah,
hearing?
we did. And let's, hearing from no one else, let's close the public hearing. And,
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
very good. And do we have a second? Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. We'll now open it for planning commission discussion. Commissioners, any discussion items?
Some of the things
Other
I
than the drawing.
thought about have been addressed, and I didn't see it anyplace, but I don't think there's any impervious surface maximums that we'd be hitting. I didn't see it in the packet.
Correct. Commissioner Pedersen, members of the commission, that was not a number that was highlighted to us because they were within standards.
Got it.
I can work that up if need be though, too.
You don't need to, I trust you.
It's figured out there, it's at 29.4%. Proposed coverage is 29.4.
I see it now.
And I think association's 35, I think is what.
That's accurate, Commissioner Kuhn.
I just wanted to clarify, Keith, did you say that there's going to be a flat face with the addition, or is this the garage addition going to have the
Correct.
required 2-foot setback from the existing facade?
Isaac just pulled up a photo, and overhead here,
Okay.
Sorry. And that'll be 2 feet back, that drawing is, I believe.
Have you looked at possibly moving it 4 feet back? And what does that do?
We have not looked at moving it back 4 feet at all with the drawings that we have. We were looking to keep it 2 feet back because majority of the garages in our neighborhood are 2 to 3.
Right.
Yeah, but we have not had a drawing up of
I
a
mean,
foot.
I've seen them as far back as 5 feet. Different, not necessarily in this neighborhood, but
Yeah.
in other neighborhoods. And I don't know if that's why they did it.
If you're trying to split the two larger cars, you're gonna need this additional room
Yeah.
to handle one of the larger vehicles.
No, I mean, just not narrower, just you set it back.
But you don't wanna move beyond the back of the house, right?
Well, it still gives them, still got 40 feet, 36 feet.
Neighborhood, we have a lot of 3-car garages, but one of the garage, you wouldn't get a big car in there.
Well, right, but this is still 36 feet deep.
I would add, Commissioner Kuhn, Chair, members of the commission, we did really early on in the process when we were talking to Mr. Bale's contractor, our first recommendation was to stagger the garage stalls. And just based on the curvature of the property line along that corner, it's not like a 3 or 4 foot hiccup in, it's like an 8-foot jog in, which was identified by the contractor property owners as not desirable because it did really stagger it in quite a bit. So it was evaluated. The request is still before you though.
I think this blends in nicely. I would think people in the neighborhood would appreciate the appearance. This is a very unique shaped lot. I don't see any downside to granting the variance, to be honest. My opinion.
And it's a neighborhood of what, $700,000-$800,000 homes?
Currently, yes, that's what, house just across the street just sold
Yeah.
for that. And we did already, we submitted it to the HOA, of course, for approval and stuff like that, and we've received approval with what we are showing today.
Good, good. Yeah, the all-important neighbors.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very, very critical. Other questions?
Just a quick question for Isaac. Are we good with the setback relative to the drainage and utility easement? And the rear, where the rear corner of the garage addition is gonna be, where the setback is 33.6 feet, which there should be it's a 30-foot rear yard setback in this. Correct?
Yeah, Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, it still meets that. It's obligated to meet the front yard for both sides, which is the same as the rear yard setback, but there's no impact that staff sees for the DNU easement.
Thank you. And I'll say that I share Commissioner Schwarting's view. I don't find anything controversial about the drawing as proposed of.
Too bad you have to lose the bathroom window.
Yeah, agreed.
Maybe that's the kids' bathroom, they can't escape.
Just to put it on the record, is there any safety concern that would be there for being 4 feet closer to the street or the sidewalk? I can't come up with one.
Commissioner Pedersen, good question. The safety concern would have come into play if they were looking for like a wider driveway footprint, wider driveway width. We are very protective of our driveway widths here in town. That's something that we would have not have granted, but that's not something that came into play as well. So we would have floored that with the homeowner, but that didn't come into play. Their additional driveway footprint is well beyond the sidewalk.
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, I like the fact that the neighbors are supporting it, but as we all know, neighbors change, so we got to try to keep some of that in line with city code as well. But at the end of the day, I'm supportive of moving forward with it.
Any other discussion, commissioners? Hearing none, I would call for a motion.
I move to recommend approval of the application for a variance from the principal uses front yard setback requirement for the property located at 2400 Heron Lane, subject to conditions as presented and discussed.
Is there a second?
I'll make a second.
Thank you. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tony, your variance is approved.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys
You're one
very
step
much.
closer.
You're one
Yeah,
step
one
closer.
step closer.
You got one more step to go.
I've learned there's a lot to go into it as a first.
And you now will be armed with most of the questions that could come up.
Exactly. When I return home, my wife will be very happy to hear what I have to tell her. So
Yep.
thank you guys very much.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Later in the week. Yep, yep.
Unless you want to stay, which is okay too.
My apologies, Commission. I meant to bring it up earlier. On page, Chair Iverson caught this earlier, on page 23 of the packet, you'll find a public notice for an old address, I believe Zumber Lane, for a public hearing notice for a newspaper. The proper one was sent out. This was properly advertised in the newspaper. It was our administrative error that the incorrect one was dragged into this packet.
If I ever want a public hearing on something I'm doing, I want it the week of July 4th.
Agreed.
Keith, thanks for making the correction in the record.
The next item is minimum residential parking space requirements, Section 20, off-street parking, loading ordinance discussion. Our last discussion item this evening is 3.2 minimum residential parking requirements. And I'll turn it over to Planner Isaac Peterson for staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Got a fun topic for discussion this evening, everyone's favorite topic, which is parking. So just a little background on why we see this in the Planning Commission packet. City staff has had several proposals and some upcoming multifamily residential proposals coming forward that the commission has seen with the Monarch development concept plan that was just shown, along with the Downtown West Phase 1 proposal that proposes multifamily residential development. So we're looking at a lot of our requirements associated with that form of development, one of which is parking. So looking at some of these development proposals that are coming down the pipeline, staff's identified the need to look at our residential parking requirement, particularly as it relates to multifamily development. So tonight we'll be having a first discussion of what staff's recommended amendment to the code is to better suit and better fit our parking code for multifamily residential development. So currently, Section 20 outlines parking requirements for the city and off-street parking requirements for varying land uses that are permitted within the city. For multiple family uses or multifamily residential uses, the city's code requirement is 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit, one of the 2 to be enclosed. In addition, later on in Section 20, within the general standards provision, some of you may be aware that there's shared parking provisions that have been supported through various parking studies over the years. It's also outlined that with the exception, or parking spaces required by Section 20-6 may be reduced by up to 50% of the requirement with the exception of residential uses. And that all residential uses within the central business district, the CBD, shall be subject to the off-street parking spaces under the ownership of the applicant required by 20-6. So basically outlining that parking shall be at a minimum what the code requirement in Section 20-6 is, which is 2 spaces per dwelling unit, one of which to be enclosed.
Will accommodate a business not requiring as much parking, but not residential,
That's accurate, Commissioner Schwarting.
if we deem it appropriate.
That's correct. So kind of looking at this in practice, and the 2 parking space per dwelling unit requirement is a traditional suburban residential parking requirement for multifamily residential developments. So looking kind of internally in town here, you can see that applied just across the street here from the city parking lot off of Steiger Lake, where we have multifamily development. There's a lot of surface parking to accommodate the 2-to-1 ratio, and then half of which is accommodated through enclosed garaged parking. So kind of a suburban form. There's more space and more room for parking at the time of when this development was approved some years ago. So the question of why or why are we discussing this now? Looking through this and the development proposals that the city's in concepts that city staff's been reviewing and looking at, that 2-to-1 space ratio really reflects, as I mentioned before, the traditional standard for suburban multifamily development where there's lots of room to grow, surface parking, that whole bit. And really, when we look at our central business district and the guidance that the city's adopted within the comp plan, which outlines 24 to 75 dwelling units per acre within the CBD, that utilization of surface parking lot to hit a high parking standard that may not be best, maybe over and above what's actually required through an apartment development, really utilizes the space and reduces the amount of density that's possible downtown. So we've been looking at local examples where the city's deviated from the 2-to-1 code requirement, and several market examples throughout the metro where that 2-to-1 ratio has not been used and has been used, an alternative has been used successfully over time. So looking at a local example here, right by where we were, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Victoria Flats project. This was a project approved in 2017 where through a PUD, the 81-unit multifamily residential development was approved with a lesser parking requirement than the code outlined. So at that time, the Flats was approved with a requirement for 1 parking space per bedroom. So there's 93 total bedrooms, plus 6 guest parking spaces to serve the building. So in practice, that requirement resulted in 91 underground parking spaces that were structured beneath the building and 16 surface parking spaces that utilized the surface parking lot constructed on the site. Of course, there was formerly a public parking lot on the property. And then there was an additional 39 shared public parking spaces provided. So in practice,
Where are those?
within the surface parking lot here.
And
So
does that count the ones on the street?
correct. So I believe that these are the 6 guest parking spots located adjacent to the door, and then there is an additional 10 on the that utilized a portion of the surface parking lot. So in practice, there is a reduction in the required parking for the residential use, which resulted in the ability to preserve space for
This is
public.
like 1.5 then?
It was 1.2, but we can jump to our little graph here.
Okay.
So looking at other market examples, these are some structures that weren't built yesterday, but have been built in the last 5 years. The Victoria Flats is listed here. On a dwelling unit basis, the result was 1.52 spaces per dwelling unit, or 1.2 spaces per bedroom. In whole, we're hovering pretty closely through these market examples of that 1.5 per dwelling unit figure, which is not uncommon through developments in the metro. I know I've only listed 7 here, but closer to the 1 or just below or above per bedroom in whole for the development. One of the motivations, and we'll pull up our draft code here, that we're recommending consideration of guiding more closely to a one per bedroom approach, is because a lot of the market drive for apartment buildings currently are deviating from the traditional 2-bedroom units. There's a lot of studio 1-bedroom units being proposed, which doesn't, in most cases, necessitate 2 parking stalls for a 400 to 500 square foot.
Depends who's living there.
Absolutely, yep.
If it's a couple, married, not married, friends, whatever, 2 people, potentially 2 drivers.
So we've included some draft code language within the background packet for you to review, and I'll go over that here. But really, staff's recommendation is to consider amendment to the code towards a 1 enclosed space per bedroom requirement, plus 1 guest space per 10 dwelling units on a building, which is akin to what the Victoria Flats project was approved for and has kind of successfully demonstrated since its opening. Additionally,
Did the math on the Victoria Flats, can you back and do the math on this with the Victoria Flats? Or is that one of your next slides?
it's not one of my next slides. I would say that 6 per guest, or 6 guest parking spots for 80 units is, got to get my calculator out here. This is riveting, I know. It's about 7%. So this is just above what the guest parking space provision was. So it's a little bit above the overall requirement that was approved for the flats.
If you did this, how many spaces, if you did Victoria Flats under this, how many spaces
Oh,
would
gotcha.
you have?
So it'd be 93 spaces, or 101 so 101 spaces plus 100, so it'd be 109 total spaces.
9, so
correct.
a lot less than the 123.
Correct. And I would say that even the flats was they provided more than their baseline requirement that was approved for was. With there's 10 additional spaces.
And the good news is they haven't had any parking complaints, right?
Yeah, Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, to our knowledge, there has been no parking complaints resulting from the flats. I would say just, I don't have a study to back this up, but I would say from observation, much of the kind of in and out parking is actually being utilized by the street parking that was developed with the flats construction.
I'm not here at 3 a.m. in the morning. Does anybody here park in the public lot?
Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, anyone here, like the
Anybody-
residents from the
Victoria-
flats?
No, Victoria Flats, residents and or guests, are they parking overnight in the public parking lot?
Yeah, I don't know 100% of the time. We haven't observed or received complaints from folks parking overnight in the public parking lot. I think there's been a couple of instances where it snowed and the lot needed to be plowed, and then there was an enforcement action at that time.
I'm just, because that, under the one proposal that we heard last time, that goes away, right? And then you're using that. So you're trying to understand how much parking is getting really used, right? You may not really know the true picture, that's all.
Yep. Parking guidance is an art, not a science.
Well, for Victoria Flats, the feedback that I've had for guests, for larger groups, and they have a party room in there, and it's on-street parking is utilized because it's readily available. So that's worked in their favor real well. In this particular situation with Victoria Flats.
Yeah, so the second half of the recommended ordinance amendment would be that, kind of dovetailing into the chair's note, that up to 15% of the required enclosed parking spaces can be provided off-site pursuant to the city council approving a request to utilize shared parking as a conditional use permit. One of the factors that we've noticed, because we're guided to find the additional room for shared parking spots through redevelopment, particularly redevelopment of adjacent right-of-ways and finding a means to install on-street parking through redevelopment, is to provide some benefit or use of that space as shared parking to help accommodate required parking for
Is it the city's obligation to do that, or is it the developer's obligation to provide parking that is available to their tenants? So
it's a
who's responsible for that?
It's a great question, Commissioner Schwarting, chair members of the commission. I think part of the dynamic is if there's no benefit to developing and providing adjacent public parking spaces or on-street parking, it kind of gets out of the realm of why would I do this through a development if there's not already shared parking available next to a development.
Well, I'm just thinking if
It could be either.
I have limited space to provide parking in my development, but I can secure a place to build an adjacent parking lot that's not necessarily attached to my building. That would be another way to provide some of the parking, right?
Correct.
And that would seemingly be onus a little bit on the developer, maybe.
Yeah. And I think kind of what you're alluding to is based on the structured code language, it basically says the parking has to be on site. So there's a couple of ways that could go. It could either be we need less units on a site to preserve space, or the other alternative that could be a possibility through amended code language is to allow the utilization with a backstop cap of only up to this point. Yeah.
Yeah, allow non-on-site parking
Correct.
to be provided, right?
And to moving on to more closely align with that amended code language that was redlined, section 20-7 is noted as conforming with the previously referenced section 20-6 amended code language.
That's a quick question. Are we okay with the impact that would be created of a 3-bedroom unit now requiring 3 enclosed spaces, whereas the previous version would have only required 2 spaces for a 3-bedroom unit?
Commissioner Vansky, chair, members of the commission, staff feels comfortable requiring that, presumably because there could be more people living in the unit. Really with the market or unit spread that we're seeing is it's centered at about 50 to 75% at a studio to 1-bedroom rate for an apartment complex, and then about 10 to 15% at a 3-bedroom rate, with the remainder being 2 bedrooms. It's like a
Well, if I had 3 guaranteed enclosed spaces, I could rent one to you monthly. And I could even rent it to a business person in town who maybe wants covered parking.
And that's wise. I mean, very seriously.
So just moving on and using an upcoming development as a talking point for how this could impact the form that we're looking at. On the screen here is the approved concept plan for the Downtown West development. As you all know, it's been considered as a phased approach to development. The city's been holding this land for about 20 to 25 years. So forthcoming is the Downtown West Phase 1 development, which really includes a one-building proposal that the Planning Commission will see at their next meeting, located here where it says proposed site. So looking at the application of the current parking requirement, and I would just back up by add, these open spaces here are noted as public land. There's a public programming parking space for shared use that's planned with the development coming. Just as a reference point with this apartment building that's upcoming, with the 145 units that are proposed, to accommodate that through the code, they would need 177 underground parking spaces, which, based on review with the applicant and city staff, is the maximum underground parking spaces that the development could facilitate, just based on where it is. Plus the utilization of 20 planned shared parking spaces along Steiger Lake Lane, and then an additional acre of surface parking spaces where the central green was planned with the development. So that's kind of a picture of what it would look like.
That's with today's codes, right?
Correct. So if there was appetite to consider amending the code upcoming, the deviation would be to allow for 177 underground parking spaces and then the utilization of shared parking spaces adjacent to the development site. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a reference.
Can you run that by me again?
Yep.
Right now, the developer's planning to put this surface lot in.
The developer is proposing to utilize underground parking spaces and the use of adjacent parking spaces through a shared
Provided by who?
combination of the developer and the city. Yeah.
So the city's building the parking lot for them.
The city is not building a parking lot for them, particularly not.
They're the first ones in.
I wouldn't recommend the city build a parking lot of this side, but I think the greater question and concern, kind of looking at this outside of a vacuum, is if this pattern of development is desired by the city, there's a land use calculation of space and parking need where just to accommodate one site requires the use of 1 acre of that property just for surface parking.
It's just tough because you don't know what else is really going to go in there. Right? Whereas downtown,
So
you got a lot of.
that's under today's ordinance.
Correct.
If we change the ordinance, what does that do?
Yeah. Commissioner Kuhn, chair, members of the commission, if the ordinance was amended, it would allow for this form of development with the utilization of shared parking for the spaces that are planned, not the whole central green area,
But it would
just visitor parking spaces adjacent to the building on the street. I would say staff is generally comfortable with that. In this situation, based on this concept plan, just given the level of development and what would not be nearby, we believe that the utilization of these shared or public parking spaces here would primarily serve the building in practice, irregardless of whether it was identified or not.
So would the development still maintain the 177 indoor spaces that was proposed with the new revised ordinance, correct?
Correct.
That would cover the dwelling units and the bedroom count, correct?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
And then the guest parking then would be this conditional use permit of on-street parking to meet those. And then potentially the remote parking lot just is eliminated altogether.
Yeah, so on the latter, leading up to the last point, yes, the city would still intend to develop this central green area as a programming space for public parking adjacent to the site, and kind of tying it in with the downtown west development as a whole.
But it may be more green space and less asphalt space, correct?
Yeah, so the difference would be having green space and just dedicating it for
So
public parking.
how many units are there again? How many units?
145 units.
145. So if you averaged 1.5 cars per unit, you're at 217. You got 177 covered, right?
Yeah, so the breakout is with the bedroom unit count, approximately,
You need 40 shared spaces. You're not showing that.
yeah, so it'd be 20 plus some adjacent to the site on this
I think
small.
you can assume that some people are in a unit by themselves and have one vehicle, but I think you have to assume that there's a good portion that have two.
Yeah,
That's where if you went 1.5 per unit, whether I'm in a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, because the 2-bedroom could be a home office, 2-bedroom could be a couple kids. Just seems like it's easier to figure out.
yeah. Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, I would note, the current code requires a parking study with major development and redevelopment. I know everyone's eyes glaze over, especially locally, when we talk parking studies. But one of the benefits to requiring a parking study, and we've requested the same from downtown west phase 1 development, is that operationally, there's a breakdown of how many parking spaces are provided for a unit. So the breakdown isn't one space per bedroom, of course. Realistically, they break out 20% of 1-bedroom units get 2 parking spots, and so on and so forth. But we'd have to still require that through any
How about
development.
somebody other than who did the Cochilla Lane traffic study?
Commissioner Schwarting, it was not provided by the same engineering firm as Cochilla Lane.
And that was just, I'm just gonna be honest, that was a little disappointing, that's all. I know we wanna accommodate some of these developments where they can't provide enough parking, but to sit there and keep saying everybody can share the same parking, it's like, well, that doesn't always work.
Yeah,
3 years ago, we're complaining we don't have enough parking, and now you're trying to squeeze development in with less parking, and that's where I'm confused. It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly, yeah.
especially in the central business district, and to take parking spaces away from downtown here, or create a problem downtown west, that all of a sudden we have all this development and no parking, and everybody's complaining there's no parking down there, or the businesses, or
Right.
whatever, because they can't park in front of my business, and they have to walk to my business. That's the only thing I'm trying to figure out here, is that we aren't gonna go down a rabbit hole and create an ordinance and then 10 years from now go, why did you do that? Because, and
Commissioner Kuhn, Chair, members of the commission, I would note that the parking ratio that's being recommended to the commission and will be recommended is pretty well sorted out. And I think the best example, because every city's different, is a local example of the flats, to see if this does work. Staff feels like the flats does work based on that ratio over time. But another kind of tying in comment would be, throughout the central business district, and we're only talking about residential uses, residential land uses are a conditional use permit within the central business district. And through that CUP process, the city has the ability to ensure conditions that various items are met.
It's like a planned unit development when we're looking at a housing thing. We have all our rules, but we throw them out the window on setbacks, side yard setbacks and stuff with the planned unit development at times.
I would say, and honestly, Commissioner Schwarting, Chairman of the Commission, the motivation to bring this before the commission as an ordinance amendment would be to avoid, in lieu of having either planned unit developments come through that waive requirements like the flats, more closely align with what we perceive as the need for parking for those residential uses.
So far as we live in an area where there's really no viable alternative means of transportation other than a bike, which is always good, but maybe not in the winter, and Uber, Lyft, right? We have no rapid transit. So if you went into like Hopkins, I assume that could be a lot of people who might ride a bus or be able to walk to work, whatever, walk to the grocery store. Here, you really don't have that. So I think that's a challenge of how we can't cut ourselves too short on parking spaces.
What are the spaces per unit under the proposed ordinance change that would be for this proposed first building?
Off the top of my head, Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, I believe, don't quote me on this, it's approximately 1.45 spaces per unit.
And that's 1.45 per unit. That would be just the on-street and the 177.
Correct.
Not too far off of 1.5.
Pretty close.
And if they built the shared parking over here, then they'd probably get there. Because you'd hate to really tie this all up as a surface lot because you don't know who else is coming and how big of a building they might want.
Yeah, I would say, Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, it would beg the question of how can parking be accommodated as a whole for this concept, just given the land area.
To a certain extent, it really does become pretty much a matter of a formula that we believe is accurate. But we also know that, based on history, that there is never enough. There's never enough parking on an ongoing basis. You know, whether it's in the evening down here, excuse me, or during the middle of the day. And it'll be the same thing in downtown West, where the utilization of all of the options that everyone has. You know, I mean, if we think it's 1.5, in a business sense, you would say, we think we know that it's 1.5, therefore we make it 2.
Or you could go 1.75. There's somewhere.
1.75, advise 1.7.
I mean, I'm torn both ways. I mean, I'm just trying to, for the residential multi-use, formula probably would work just fine. When you get into businesses, it's a different story because you got business hours versus non-business hours, you know. Which then your calculation goes different because it's like.
Right. We need to be cautious not to bleed the business parking problem with
Right, with
the
multi-
residential multifamily parking
Right.
situation, so.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, it's like, you know, you would think the developer would want to make sure he's got enough parking for the people, because if all of a sudden he's got empty apartments because he doesn't have enough parking, people aren't going to come, well, I don't have a parking space, so I'm not going to rent from you. I'm going to go somewhere else. So you know that they're going to want to accommodate what they have. In one way, they kind of know what they're marketing to also, you know. No different than residential housing, building a 2-car garage versus a 3-car, or, you know, if whatever the market's going to desire is what they're going to go after, you know. And us being out here, like you said, we're not in Hopkins or Edina or St. Louis Park, or Eden Prairie, where public transit is viable, so we are a more mobile community. But what was the building back here off Steiger Lake? Did you get a count on that one or not?
Commissioner Kuhn, Chair, members of the commission, I did not get a count on the structured parking stalls. That's why I didn't include it within the background packet. I wasn't able to dig up the really legible set of plans. So I apologize, but I can certainly bring forward that as an example if I do some.
I mean, that's just an earlier one that was done. And I don't know, again, if that's more senior housing or what's even over there.
Well, we're just at a discussion on this,
Yeah.
correct? We're not bringing this forward to.
Yeah, Commissioner Vansky, Chair, members of the commission, this is an initial go at talking through this. We do have an upcoming development proposal that's not being proposed as a land unit development, Downtown West Phase 1. So consideration of an ordinance amendment based on this current form that I noted before you. An ordinance amendment would be needed to facilitate this development among others, to more align closely with what we believe, what staff believes is
You
required.
got this one, and then you have the Gannon property, right?
Correct.
It'd be interesting to see side by side how a potential ordinance change affects them both.
Yeah.
That one's even more difficult, I think, because you're taking a surface public parking lot away, making it part of the facility to, again, share. And as we talked about with them, it's undefined as to how you regulate shared parking between residents and just general visitors to Victoria.
Yeah, Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, it would, an agreement like that would have to be structured through an agreement, a shared parking agreement that the city would have to consider.
But you'd have to provide whatever base we're gonna have through the ordinance would have to be provided. The sharing is the loss of the surface public parking lot, right? That's in addition. That's not in lieu of, it's in addition to. I think.
Yeah. So the Monarch development that the commission saw at your last meeting proposed a use of 1 space per bedroom. The proposed ordinance amendment goes beyond that because it would require an additional 7 or 8 spaces to accommodate guest parking for the utilization.
I think it would be instructive for us to see what this Downtown West, the metrics would work out under the existing, under the proposed, so that we could see the number of spaces. The other thing I think might be enlightening is that when I look at your comparison to Marketplace and eliminate the consideration of the on-street abutting parking spaces. So if I just look at Victoria Flats, and I take the 123 units and knock off the 16 units, you're roughly sitting around 1-to-1. So, and that's basically what you're proposing is 1-to-1, and then the guest parking has to get worked out from there. If we feel like Victoria Flats works, it works for Victoria Flats, will it work in another location? Or is it, did we just get lucky with hitting that one? So, but I think it would be good to see what that looks like, because this 5 Central and Aseo, you take the 41 spaces of public parking out, and it looks quite dismal compared to everything else. Now, I don't know how that's situated and, how much it's relying on that. It seems like it's relying heavily on the public parking spaces to meet the needs of the residents that live there, but I think looking at these without the public contribution would be instructive for us to see, are we hitting that ratio? And then I understand that the desire would be to, hey, give a better bright line test, but as Commissioner Schwartz points out, that if that's the way we're going to go, then we need to understand that, and when these things come up, that there is little deviation from that the developers will come and try to say, those are the rules, but make a change for me. That would be counterproductive to what we're trying to get done here.
If Victoria Flats is working, they provided above and beyond, then I think it tells you that above and beyond is what we need to require.
And to that point,
Peace and harmony.
Commissioner Shorting, I think to that point, having a better suited or better fitted parking requirement allows for going above and beyond on site through redevelopment. Meaning, if the parking requirement for Victoria Flats was a 2-to-1 requirement, that public parking likely wouldn't have been, or the project likely wouldn't have happened. But there definitely wouldn't have been public parking tied with the development. It would have been attributed straight to the use of the building.
Again, there's 91 underground spaces, 16 surface, plus an additional 39 shared public parking that the developer provided. Or not the city. City didn't provide it, the developer provided it, right?
Yeah, it was constructed with the site. There was spaces there before the flats went in.
But, certainly with downtown West, is that it's primary, there's one pretty well-defined development that may well occur, true?
Yeah,
One building. So the rest of it, has to be put in the context of, well, number one, we don't know. We don't know what's going in there. But based on the fact that we don't know what's going in there, what would be a intelligent assumption of who would fill the other buildings in there? And what sort of, I've read the traffic flow reports and some of that, and that's pretty interesting. That's people that have, by and large, have been pretty accurate in terms of traffic flow and the whole thing. So to come up with a number, we actually do need more information as to what we think is going to be in there. The developer, Kraus Anderson, what do they think? Who are they marketing this to?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would say the city's plan, the concept plans and feasibility studies that have been done to date have shown that there would be 450 or so dwelling units within downtown West. Just 146 of which are shown in this proposed site Phase 1 development. So if we kind of extrapolate that number based on the current code, that would be about 800 to 950 parking spaces dedicated solely to the residential land use. And I think part of the problem arises, and why we're having this dialogue now, is just based on land area. It's not quite, it would be exceedingly challenging to meet that code requirement just on the space that's available.
Your apartment has underground parking, so they're utilizing the land for
Correct.
parking and building, and then the other ones, there's no underground parking associated with those, so it becomes tougher.
Or it's unknown, rather.
But the Victoria Flats, are my numbers wrong? Isn't it 1.8 parking spaces, the 91 plus the 16 plus the 39? So 146 divided by 81. You only show 123. Am I including these other public spaces and you're not? Where's my math off? Where's the other slide? This, yeah.
So it's not utilizing the 30.
Oh, this isn't what they did. This is what they did, right?
Yeah, so they did 91 plus 16,
Plus 39.
and then there's 39 additional public parking that wasn't included within their requirement.
But that exists on the right side here.
Correct.
They did that
Correct.
on their own with their money.
Well, they took some of this, there was a city parking lot there.
Correct.
There was a lot there that had parking spaces in it that was owned by the city, that they took over and,
Again, so we don't know how many people in Victoria Flats routinely utilize and tie up those spaces versus them being available for what was once public parking. Which will be the similar issue with the other proposed development on the Gannon property. But parking supported in this area is much higher, right? Because of that. You can't ignore the fact that, I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't know that anybody can park in here. I'm always parking over here on the street when I come here.
Yeah, it is a public parking lot.
there are spots, yeah.
It's kind of tucked away. It doesn't seem obvious, but maybe I'm not reading signs.
I would say there's a sign right above it.
Is there a sign right above it? That would be a key. I can read the sign.
Placemaking standards.
Here's your sign.
But, yeah, mathematically, you're right, that would put it very close to 2.
Is it closer to 2?
And,
Yeah.
but I don't know, to me, even downtown west is different than the Gannon CBD district.
Yes.
Project. I mean, downtown west, we got stuff to work with still. You know, you build something out here, it's gonna be here, and there's nowhere to add more parking or change something. Where downtown west, we could say, okay, well, we need more parking, so put a double-decker ramp in or something in an area or something by a grocery store or by shopping areas or.
Well, unless you could,
Yeah.
you're losing this surface lot, create an equal surface lot next to the health food store thing, whatever that place is. What's it called? Health Hub. I mean, there's land there. I don't know who owns it, but,
Oh, you mean down the street here?
pardon me? Yeah, as you're going down the Steeper Lake. And you've got the Kelly irrigation, right, at some point in time. Their land's probably worth more than their building.
So this is
There's
a,
all kinds of parking. I mean, there's public works too that you could.
Yeah, but that's much
Yeah.
further down, so it's a longer walk.
Yep.
Yeah.
so this is a discussion item, and the next meeting, then we'll be going over what that proposal entails in
Yeah.
downtown west?
Chair, members of the commission, so we've got a couple of different paths that we could go on. The downtown west phase 1 plan is recommended to go before you at your next meeting. If without facilitating an ordinance amendment, that would be delayed. Again, staff does feel comfortable with what's being proposed if an ordinance amendment were to take place. So at your next meeting, if there was an appetite from the commission for considering an ordinance amendment, staff would bring that forward to you. There'd be a public hearing in consideration of it with any additional material that the commission wanted to hear before considering an ordinance amendment. And then the Downtown West Phase 1 development would be brought to you following that item. If there is not an appetite to consider an ordinance amendment, my recommendation would be that the site as a whole would need to be reevaluated, concept plan and all. So that's kind of where we're at.
That makes sense.
I don't know, I don't want to force a code change just because of one property.
Yeah, and again, I would note it's staff's using Downtown West Phase 1 as an example here tonight. We have our Monarch development concept that was brought to the commission last week, and there's several other.
And Laura wasn't here, and I know she's very knowledgeable on parking and the history of parking here. That's what I've been told. So I hate not to have her insight.
Given the option, and I guess an option that we have, I would prefer that we take the opportunity to review it in our minds and take another look at it, and then at our next meeting. By then, we'll be prepared, if that works for everyone.
What's the proposal? Is it one?
So Commissioner Kuhn, Chair, members of the commission, the proposed language would be one enclosed space per bedroom plus one guest space per 10 dwelling units, with additional language noting that shared parking can be utilized up to 15% of the required parking spaces needed by the code, but not waiving the residential parking requirement by 50%. I don't want it to be misconstrued with that. So this would be the provision.
I think it's too low, because just because I'm a one doesn't mean I don't have two vehicles.
That's kind of where I'm at, like the 1.25 or 1.2 per bedroom. You know, and we're still with the one guest per 10. No, I mean, that's better than the 2 to 1, isn't it? I'd have to do that. That's just.
Yeah, no, you get twisted up pretty quickly.
Well, I mean, maybe perhaps another way to think about it is 1.5 spaces for dwelling units with 1 bedroom or less, and then 1 parking space per bedroom beyond that. So that would address your question about a 1-bedroom or a studio unit. You would say we'd want 1.5 parking spaces allocated for those smaller units, but then when you hop into 2-bedroom, then you're 2, which you're the same as you are today, and then you actually increase the number of spaces if there were a 3-bedroom unit, because you would then have 3 spaces for that 3-bedroom unit, whereas today we're only requiring 2.
But, I mean, I have a 4-bedroom house, but I'm only required 2 enclosed spaces. So bedrooms, I think, gets a little tough, because bedrooms doesn't, you got kids, you know, whatever, elderly parents staying with you, whatever.
So from your perspective, from your standpoint, Isaac, what number, based on the discussion, do you see as a viable for it from the standpoint of selling, you know, having someone come in to invest in that property and something that'll work? Because I think that's kind of where we're at, is that if we use up too much room for parking, we're in a bind. If we use up too little, needless to say, you know, that's a problem too.
It seems like your market examples, the 1.5
That's,
per unit is more consistent than it would seem like the bedrooms are, but I'm just kind of eyeballing.
yeah, so Chair, members of the commission, I would say if there was a desire to go with a bedroom metric, and there's kind of two ways to skin this cat. Staff, I feel very comfortable working with our planning consultant and others, looking at this with a 1 per bedroom plus guest parking spaces. That roughly equates to 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit, on the whole.
I think that could be good. Because there are going to be some people who are just going to have 1 car and 1 unit, right? And there'll be others with 2.
Yeah.
You're looking at a mix. And maybe that could even encompass guest parking spaces, I don't know. But, or you maybe just have to have some guest spaces based on, maybe your guest spaces is still then factored above and beyond that. 1.5 for
Well, if you look,
residents, and then something else for your,
if you look
have
at
your
the,
one per 8 or something, was it, or?
well, if you look at the line of total on-site parking, it's all about, on bedrooms, it's right around 1 per bedroom. Or less. And then on-street would be your guest parking or shared parking, or however you want it. I mean, it's not necessarily designated for the apartment or for the building. It's on-street parking abutting, and it's open to anybody. I mean, if you got, and then you get into your, so really your 1 and your 15 and really kind of works based off your graph here, you know, on that line.
Maybe to back up, does the commission, just to kind of get a gut check, does the commission have any preference towards a bedroom requirement versus a dwelling unit?
My personal preferences, I've probably stated here, would be units. Because bedrooms, I think you could have all studio apartments, but yet you could still have 2 car drivers in a studio apartment. So you would be grossly underestimating the parking need, whereas a 1.5 on a unit basis seems to better factor the potential for only 1 car and then 2 cars based on the unit count, regardless of bedrooms. Because again, bedrooms could be kids, bedrooms could be a office, from work from home. But it just seems like the bedrooms by themselves, the mix of what the developer wants to put in there would certainly alter the parking requirement. That's why I think a unit's a unit. Somebody's living there. Somebody's living there, and they're gonna, and if you're living there, you probably have a car.
Well,
You probably have at least 1, and a portion of them are gonna have 2.
well, and I don't, would a developer say, well, this is a bedroom and that's an office, so I only need 1 bedroom, not 2 bedroom?
That's why a unit's a unit.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just
think you go by
throwing
unit.
hypotheticals out there.
Yeah.
You know, what do you consider a bedroom, you know? And if somebody's building apartments and they're saying, well, this has an office and a bedroom, but yet that office could technically.
I'm in a studio, I don't even have a bedroom. I need 0 parking spaces.
Right, I mean, if we just look at the market examples of, in the 2 different approaches and consider only on-site parking, you know, you're looking at 1.3 spaces per unit to 1.5 spaces per unit. And if you're looking at it in terms of bedrooms, then you're looking right around 1 space per unit. So, I think we're in the same spot. We're kind of drives the 1 unit per bedroom. If you want to keep things, requiring 1.5 per unit would put things heavy vis-a-vis Victoria Flats, but vis-a-vis Eden Prairie and Edina's, that's 1.5 units, 1.5 spaces per unit. It's the same math.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, just kind of comment, looking at this stuff, Chair, members of the commission, the technical guidance that I drew from many of the developments that we reviewed relies on the IT traffic trip generation manual, which is kind of the standard thing that most engineers use. Looking on surface value for what their guidance is, it's like 1.31, 1.3 spaces per dwelling unit. So kind of what we're trying to get at from a staff level is to go above that. And we'd feel like we could accommodate that through a 1 per bedroom or a 1.5 roughly per dwelling unit
Be about
requirement.
1.3,
Correct.
right?
It's not a easy issue though, so
Well, it isn't at all, but, I looked through it, I looked through the packet, and I ran the numbers from my perspective at the same time, which of course involves a reasonable level of guessing. And 1.5 per unit is what I came up with. And, averaging out what we anticipate could be the occupancy. So,
What you're saying is that the city council can elect to enable more shared parking based on the unit and what it brings to the town. So if 1.5 is the guidelines, somebody could request something different, but they'd have to have a compelling reason, right?
Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, what we're proposing is that up to 15% of the space is required through, back here, by whatever count is established through the parking requirement, could be addressed with shared parking up to that 15% threshold. So not reducing it,
So
but allowing
by
for shared.
providing additional shared parking or by using shared parking that already exists for everybody?
It could be either. I would say that any proposal in the typical guidance that's established by code is that an applicant or development provides a common good, or in most cases, more shared parking, to utilize shared parking on the back end. So it would have to be reviewed though as a conditional use permit based on the code language that exists today and is what's proposed.
So is that something that has to be in writing, that people are just going to say, gee, I'm just going to go ahead and plan my development knowing that I'll tell the city council I won't do it unless I'm able to use 15% shared parking from somewhere else provided by the city? I mean, that can be there, but does it have to be on public record, published?
Yeah, no, it's really a great question.
I mean, it's an accommodation. It's like, hey, we're gonna grant this one. The 1.5 per unit is the guidelines. We really like this development. It's going in the west. There's not a lot of restaurant usage. There's not a lot of other things, so we're willing to accommodate 1.3. There is no shared parking, maybe, right? It's just that we think that unit's going to be different. The dynamics of that area could start off different.
Yeah, and Commissioner Schwarting, presumably, through that review, a few different outcomes that could happen if development requested that, they could either be required to pay for the utilization of the shared parking, or provide an alternative development or
You have to say up to 15%. Could you just say, hey, available shared parking can be utilized
yeah.
based on review of the situation and particular
We-
opportunity?
One of the initial draft editions of this recommended amendment left it nebulous as identified through a parking demand study that's approved by the city council. Staff felt that it would be beneficial to include a backstop so that there's something in place, vacillated between 10 and 20% on what that backstop could be. We see 15% here.
I'd say that 15% can be 10%.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel that 1.5 spaces per unit feels light. And one space per bedroom, we were feeling might feel a touch heavy, but when you're getting to upper ones, but for like a 1 bedroom and for studios, one space per bedroom feels like it's inadequate. So I'm gonna kind of lean towards if it's less than 2 bedrooms, it's 1.5 spaces. And then when you get into a 2-bedroom, you'd have 2 spaces. When you get into a 3-bedroom, you added 3 spaces. And that would cover Commissioner Schwarting's idea that, hey, at 1 space is too light for a 1-bedroom where 2 people would be living in it because they both have cars. So then, on the average, you would then take over for the people who only need 1 car for 1 bedroom. You have this sort of like.
So I think you average that out with the 1.5 a little bit. I hear what you're saying.
Certainly. So that was less than two
Less than 2 bedrooms, it would be 1.5 spaces. Because then a 1-bedroom and a studio would still need 1.5 spaces. And then 2 bedrooms you'd have 2. 3 bedrooms, you'd have 3.
Well, do you really need to go all the way to 2, or could you go 1.75? Because again, just because I have 2 bedrooms, if I have kids, they're not driving per se.
She might have a partner who is. And then you'd need 2 spaces, so.
I would hope that at 1.5 on average by unit, depending, I don't care what kind of unit it is, I think would have us covered. But
I would concur. Just strictly looking at mathematically.
otherwise we're going to get into the size of your car. If you have an Escalade,
Yeah, Escalade.
1.8.
1.75 spaces.
Because you can't park it in their spot. We're not helping you, are we?
That's okay. Chair, members of the commission, I think what I'm gathering is there's some comfort with the 1.5 per dwelling unit count, potentially with some additional beyond that, which could I'd have to do some checking on kind of what that math would break out to if we're, I want to say, tiering out the bedrooms. I think I would recommend, if there's a tiered approach, to stick with, if we want to consider bedrooms on a whole, my recommendation would be to stick strictly to a X amount of spaces per bedroom count, just for consistency, but perhaps a 1.5 space per dwelling plus additional guest parking, which would get us above and beyond what staff's proposed to you here this evening.
Do you know in the one that we're going to see on our next meeting, how many are 2 bedrooms, how many are 3 bedrooms, do you have any idea?
Commissioner Schwarting, yes, I do. I don't have it memorized, but Yeah.
Or even Victoria Flats, what's the mix? I have no idea what the mix of apartment sizes is.
I don't either.
Yeah, so it's, Victoria Flats was 81 units plus, and there's 93 bedrooms total. I believe
there's-
that there is a higher mix of 2-bedroom units or a few 3-bedroom units.
Well, it sounds like they're mostly 1-bedroom, right?
Correct.
I think we sort of need to really view that, because if there were a development that had all 2 units and we said 1.5 units, 1.5 spaces per unit, we'd be in trouble.
Excuse me. Apologize for cutting you off, Commissioner Vansky. There's 101 bedrooms rather, with Victoria Flats, 81 units. We could provide a more detailed breakdown.
No, but it tells you that the majority are 1-bedroom, right?
Correct.
You said the trend was more 2-bedrooms.
Commissioner Schwarting, Chair, members of the commission, I would say the trend is predominantly what the metro is currently experiencing is towards studios and 1-bedrooms.
Okay. I thought 2-bedroom. I thought we'd heard in one of our previous sessions that 2-bedrooms were growing because of possibly 2 people working from home and needed separation, but maybe that was a short-lived thing. Right.
I do know that the condos by the transit center for Eden Prairie, a bulk of them are 2-bedroom. And I have some friends that live, 3 different people that I know that live over there, and it's primarily 2-bedroom. And there's an awful lot of, it's either a couple or 2 people at the same time, so,
Do they get to use the transit parking garage?
they have their own.
They have their own.
Yeah, they have their own ramp. Yep. Yeah, and that would be interesting to, maybe to have some, some defined statistics on that as a source of, truly what is trending. I mean, I would, I would think that would be additional information that would be beneficial to us. Do we want to leave this, gentlemen, as, let's hold off on making any decision? We'll get some more information. We'll be ready at the next meeting?
I support that. And then we would benefit from Commissioner Moore and Commissioner Murray's input as well.
Yep.
Chair, members of the commission, just to kind of button it up and maybe summarize what we've discussed here this evening. Just as head nods, do we feel like we're moving towards the 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit count?
I think we are. I do want to be sensitive to if there's a large mix of 2, 3 bedrooms, that maybe there should be a kicker based on those. But again, I think the 1.5 probably gets you there, but without knowing what this development is, that makes it a little tough. But I don't like the bedroom count just on its own.
Potentially a 3-bedroom would be the exception to that rule. Is that,
Well, I think
are
they're-
you in agreement with
really,
that?
realistically, do you think there's that many 3-bedroom units being made? Everything.
I would say there's, I know this off the top of my head, there's 3 or 4 proposed in the downtown west, phase 1 piece.
3 or 4 3-bedroom units, just out of the whole group.
Of the 145 units.
I do know that having, Wall Street Journal has been running a number of different articles on the real estate business. And rental is hot. Rental is very hot for families. So the need for potentially 3 bedrooms, apartment, that may not have been a good idea 10 years ago, but
But affordability is also key, and how many people can really afford a 3-bedroom unit. I think they'd be hard pressed, because rents are going up.
Rents are going up. I know very, very familiar with the Arlington, Virginia area. And there's a bulk of 3 very large developments are all rental. And there's 3-bedroom
But
apartments.
they got the metro line, they work downtown. I think the dynamics, I hear you.
different-
We can't compare ourselves to New York City. I don't
Yeah, that, you're exactly right. But I mean, conceptually, the rental, while that may not make sense for many of us, it's,
Well, it's affordability in that area. Who can afford the single-family home, maybe, right? I mean, there's lots of dynamics.
well,
Every 4 years, people turn over, so maybe I'm better off renting.
when condos are selling for, 1.4, then rental is an option,
Interest
so.
rates going up, affordability for people to buy homes and or condos. The rental market, in theory, could do better, right?
So, Chair, members of the commission, I'm hearing 1.5 plus number to be specified.
I weigh in as a 1.5 plus for the larger size units, or if we're gonna do it on a bedroom count, 1 stall per bedroom, but when you step down to a 1-bedroom or even a studio, then you step up to 1.5 spaces for those.
Okay. And then in addition to a revised metric at 1.5 plus, data supporting what the impact would be proportional to past developments and developments that could be under consideration. Is there anything that I'm missing, Mr. Chair, members of the commission?
No, I think I think it was a good discussion. And I think that we're, very definitely much more prepared to, to come up with a concrete number.
I move we park the parking.
So moved. That item is closed.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, just in closing, assuming there's the appetite for it, staff would intend on bringing you a draft ordinance amendment based on this conversation with a revised metric and supporting information to your next meeting. That would require a public hearing, and it would either be approved or recommended for approval or denial with the Downtown West Phase 1 development concurrent to that. So that's what we'll be working on, and
Okay.
can get you some information.
Very good, thank you. Chair's comments. So there's 2 people that I want to thank. One is Commissioner Greg Ivansky for representing us at the City Council meeting for the semi-annual review.
Thank you, Chair.
And I would guess that they were very receptive to the accomplishments that we've made.
They were.
The other one is Christian Pedersen, who filled in for both of us at the previous meeting. Thank you for stepping up. Thank you for.
My pleasure. You're welcome.
It's an easy job.
You did 3 encores. That's how good it was.
Not bad, not bad. There was a couple of city council meetings. Greg, you have one, do you? Were you at the last, or at the previous city council meeting where you gave the presentation?
I was at the city council meeting where I gave the presentation.
Excellent.
I don't have discussion points for that, so if I could bring them next time, that'd
Absolutely.
be great. But in summary, we made our presentation, as we well know, and then the Park and Rec made their presentation, and then There were a few consent item agendas and nothing that was taken up. The consent agenda, and then prior to that meeting was the volunteer appreciation night that the city had. And handing out appreciation awards and then recognizing those volunteers for the city who went through Citizens Academy. And then the meeting adjourned. So I don't know if there's really much more to summarize than that.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah, if you want to, do a more detail, that'd be fine. If you don't, that's fine also.
Great, thank you.
I was at the last city council meeting, and it was, and I spent about an hour and a half out in the lobby.
Sorry, Mr.
And
Chair.
I'll explain that later. But it was Park and Rec Month, and recognized what the Park and Rec group has done. They then went into a closed meeting on the purchase of property at 8101 Cochia Lane for the fire, for a new fire hall. And a purchase was approved.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there was the council direction to pursue that.
Pursue that, okay.
Is that right there by the pump house?
Right on,
Cochia, right?
right on,
Where the gardens are?
right on 82nd, right at the intersection.
No, down
Or
on
down,
82nd and
yeah.
Cochia. It's on the
Isn't that where the housing developments?
No, it's,
Oh, is it on the one corner? There's like an old
I think it's where
farmhouse?
I think it's where the soccer fields are. Holy family, I don't know exactly where.
Yeah, it's, Chair, members of the commission, it's on the Holy Family property.
So I thought it was by Holy Family, right?
Yeah, it's on like where the soccer field is, or the lacrosse practice fields, or,
Well, you want to be on Cochia, right?
no,
Yep.
it'd be on 82nd.
And 82nd is kind of the key route. Then there was
Somebody's had to draw me a picture.
on the way home.
Yeah.
Then there was the sale of the old public works site. And they will negotiate a sale of that.
Chair, members of the commission, the city is considering sale and or lease of the old public works site, so there's
Approve the process.
feedback given on that potential.
Was there some concern for environmental issues there
Yes.
at the old public works site, or no?
The old public works site, if memory serves me correct, was once the town dump.
Yeah.
Chair, members of the commission, allegedly. No, I get, but there was a environmental assessment, phase 1 environmental assessment been done some years ago, but a full environmental review has not been done on the site.
Then there was so I was visiting with the people that were involved in the sale of revenue bonds for Holy Family Catholic School. And there was an approval for issuance of $5 million bond.
That's accurate, Mr. Chair.
Yep. And so they entertained me the whole time. And we then came back in, and then it was all over. So then we have the other item 6.4 was the Timber Glen Loomis Homes. And that is on a 120-day for them to respond if they want to move forward. Is that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, so the applicant Loomis Homes for the Timber Glen development on the Monday of that meeting requested that the application be tabled, and they requested an extension to their preliminary plat and rezoning review for up to 120 days. So we anticipate that the council will review that application in the next month or so here, but it would have to be reviewed within 120 days of that extension, which is, if I recall correctly, November 27th, 2022.
Is this an indication of changing times in the housing industry, or
It's a great question, Commissioner Schwarting.
rates are up?
There are different things happening, but
There was a bunch of complexities in that, and we visited that twice.
Well, there was the street extension, who's paying for that?
Yep, just recently. So, so that is, 120 days out. Final reports, nothing noteworthy. That's all I have. Staff, any miscellaneous?
nothing for me, Mr. Chair. I think we've got it pretty well covered here tonight. We got, as noted before, some developments coming down the pipeline that the commission will be seeing at future meetings, so it'll be great.
Commissioners, any thoughts, any comments, anything to add that hasn't been added? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? We are officially adjourned.
Thanks, guys.